Next, Ironforge and the Awakening of the Dwarves. 2,500 years before the Dark Portal. I think by the time we get to the end of the first chronicle, it'll be like Dark Portal time. Far to the south of Dalaran, the ancient vault of Uldaman lay darkened and silent. Ages ago, Ironia and Keeper Arcades had gone into hibernation. Many of the mechanomes who had once watched over Uldaman's machineries had departed as well, after being afflicted by the curse of flesh. But a handful of these faithful clockwork servants had remained. Their once resilient forms gradually succumbed to the degradations of time. They broke down and died out until only one was left. Although this lone mechanome did her best to maintain Uldaman, much of the stronghold fell into disrepair. Soon the curse of flesh began to chip away at her metallic form. The affliction eventually transformed her into a gnome, and she grew old and close to death. Aware that she did not have much time left, the gnome worked to free the earthen hibernating deep within Uldaman. She could not bear the thought that when she passed, they would be abandoned forever in the vault's deadened halls. With her dying breath, the gnome activated the earthen's hibernation chambers. The chambers stirred to life. The Titan forged, slumbering within, awoke to a new world and a new destiny. These awakened earthen discovered that they had changed dramatically. The curse of flesh had taken its toll, transforming them into creatures of flesh and blood, creatures who would call themselves dwarves. Still groggy from their years of slumber, the dwarves stumbled from the broken halls of Uldaman and emerged onto the surface of the world. They found themselves drawn to the west, where a range of majestic stone mountains towered into the clouds. Much like the gnomes who had left Uldaman centuries ago, the dwarves were forced to contend with the savage beasts that prowled the land. Yet, whereas the gnomes had used their ingenuity to overcome these threats, the dwarves relied on their resilience and natural physical strength. Eventually, they reached the mountains they had seen on the western horizon, and they settled in the snowy region of Dun Moreau. Although the curse of flesh had diminished their memories, the dwarves still held faint ties to their Titan-forged heritage. Inspired by these recollections of the past, they named their new home Kaz-Modan, or Mountain of Kaz, in honor of the Titan shaper Kaz-Garoth. The dwarves retained a natural affinity to stoneworking and mining as well. They delved into the heart of Kaz-Modan's tallest mountain and crafted an immense forge. Around it, the dwarves built a proud city called Ironforge. This would become the seat of their new home, a great and mighty nation that would stretch deep under the mountains. As the dwarves set out to mine Kaz-Modan's mountains and expand their holdings, they discovered the gnomes dwelling in the nearby caverns. The people of Ironforge were enthralled by the ingenuity and techno-savvy of their diminutive neighbors. The dwarves also sensed a natural kinship with the gnomes, due in large part to their shared Titan-forged ancestry. The dwarves imparted their knowledge of stoneworking and construction to the gnomes, helping them lay the foundations of a wondrous city that would later be called Gnomragon. In turn, the gnomes taught the dwarves engineering and science, introducing much-needed efficiency and advancements to Ironforge. Although the gnomes and dwarves would largely keep to themselves in the centuries that followed, they had formed an unbreakable bond and would aid each other in times of need. The Gurubashi Civil War. In the southern reaches of the eastern kingdoms, the Gurubashi jungle trolls languished in poverty and hardship. They had never fully recovered from the destruction wrought by the Sundering. Many hunting and farming grounds were forever lost, and famine was a constant companion for the empire. Desperate to reclaim their former glory, the Gurubashi of Stranglethorn Vale eventually turned to the powerful Loa spirits whom the trolls worshipped. One such creature answered their call. Hakar, the Soul Flayer, the Loa of Blood. The malevolent spirit promised to help the Gurubashi extend their empire across the lower half of the eastern kingdoms. In return, He demanded large numbers of living sacrifices. The Gurubashi who pledged their loyalties to Hakkar became known as the Hakkari. They soundly defeated nearby packs of gnolls and tribes of murlocs, as well as other trolls who opposed Hakkar. Those taken prisoner soon wished they had died in battle. Hakkar's disembodied spirit gorged on the blood of the captives for years. Under the Hakkari's control, the Gurubashi had achieved all they had hoped, conquering vast swaths of land and even many of the islands that dotted the coasts of the South Seas. The Zandalari, observing these events from afar, were pleased at first with the Gurubashi's return to conquest and traditional worship. Yet once it became clear that Hakkar's bloodlust would never be sated, they knew that the fiendish god would drive not only the troll race to destruction, but the entire world. The Zandalari rallied their forces and set sail for the eastern kingdoms. There they met with Gurubashi trolls who had kept their descent hidden from the Hakkari. The Zandalari and their new allies learned that a faction of Hakkar's most zealous priests, the Atali, were attempting to summon the lowest spirit into a living form. This in turn would awaken terrible new dimensions of his power and spell certain doom for the troll race. Horrified by the Atali's plans, the Zandalari host stormed the Gurubashi capital of Zul'Gurub. Battles raged among the vine-covered ziggurats of the temple city, day and night. Finally, atop Hakkar's blood-stained shrine, the Zandalari defeated Hakkar and most of his crazed followers. Despite this victory, the Zandalari and their allies agreed to remain vigilant for any sign of Hakkar's reappearance. The Loa was not truly dead. His spirit had merely been banished from the physical world. A number of his fanatical Atali priests had also escaped into the jungles surrounding Zul'Gurub. These trolls finally settled in the Swamp of Sorrows, north of the Gurubashi capital. In the heart of the wild marshland, they secretly constructed a great temple to their bloodthirsty Loa, the Temple of Atal Hakkar. Deep within the temple, the Atali continued their worship of Hakkar. They practiced grisly rituals and ceremonies, hoping to once again summon the Loa into the physical world. Dark magics twisted the flora and fauna surrounding the temple. This in turn drew the attention of the green dragon aspect, Ysera. Upon learning of the Atali plans to summon Hakkar, Ysera unleashed her powers on the temple and its inhabitants. The dragon aspect's attack buckled the temple's walls and blasted its foundations apart. The immense ziggurat began sinking beneath the land. As the swampy mire engulfed the temple, the terrified Atali abandoned their rituals and scattered into the marshlands. Though Ysera had thwarted Hakkar's return, she knew that the Atali might someday attempt to summon the Loa again. Thus she commanded a number of her loyal green dragons to watch over the ruined temple and ensure it would never again be used to bring such evil into the world. Okay, so this stuff is all backstory of raids and dungeons that we have in Vanilla Warcraft and Burning Crusade Warcraft. I have definitely fought Hakkar before. Multiple times. They're always trying to bring him back. And it explains why there were green dragons there. Eldra Thalas and the Binding of Imul Thar. When I pause, it's because there's a comma there. Far across the sea from the Gurubashi Empire, a secretive society of highborn who had survived the Great Sundering grappled with an uncertain future. They were known as the Shendralar, meaning those who remain hidden. Nearly 10,000 years before, Queen Azshara had charged them with the storage and safekeeping of her most precious tomes. Led by Prince Tortheldrin, the Shendralar dutifully obeyed their queen. They journeyed into the misty heart of Kalimdor's southern jungles and established a grand city called Eldra Thalas. When the Great Sundering later decimated the world, Eldra Thalas narrowly escaped destruction. Only the efforts of Tortheldrin and his followers spared the city. Together they wove a great spell to shield Eldra Thalas from the destructive forces of the Sundering. Although they had saved their city, the Chandrilar soon discovered that the Well of Eternity had been consumed in the Sundering. Without the fount of power to draw on, Tortheldrin and his followers saw their immortality greatly diminished. The Chandrilar soon fell into a deep lethargy and languished in their isolated sanctuary. Tortheldrin eventually formulated a plan to revitalize the Chandrilar. He forged pylons in one of the damaged wings of Eldra Thalas, constructing a prison to house a new source of power, a demon named Imolthar. To the shock of the other Chandrilar, Tortheldrin had covertly summoned and bound the terrifying creature to siphon the demon's power and give it to his followers. Any objections were quickly settled once the other Chandrilar experienced the demon's energy for themselves. Though dark and volatile, Imolthar's power was invigorating and addictive, more so than even the Well of Eternity had been. The Chandrilar reveled in their newfound source of power, but they knew that keeping Imolthar in their midst was dangerous. Thus they developed a means to use the demon's power to keep him imprisoned. For thousands of years all seemed well. Yet the cost of keeping Imolthar restrained required more and more power. Nearly 9,000 years after the Sundering, the demon's prison crossed a dangerous threshold. It began consuming so much energy that the Chandrilar were left with none to siphon for themselves. Almost overnight, Tortheldrin's seemingly ingenious plan had unraveled, and his access to the demon's magic was gone. I don't know, I mean, if you live for 9,000 years, isn't that long enough? So this is the highborn city of Eldra Thalas, later known as Dire Maul, which is another place where we have raids and dungeons. Not only had the Chandrilar lost their immortality once again, but they had also grown hopelessly addicted to Imolthar's potent energies. Desperate to regain his power, Tortheldrin plotted with his closest allies and murdered the other Chandrilar in cold blood. Tortheldrin's treacherous plan worked. Having thinned the population, the remaining elves could draw on Imolthar's power indefinitely. With the Chandrilar's numbers diminished, Tortheldrin and his followers abandoned much of their once glorious city. The greater part of Eldra Thalas fell into darkness and disrepair. Soon other creatures from the surrounding jungles moved in to stake their claim to the crumbling elven refuge. So the center part is still much as it was, but the outside just turns into ruins. And in World of Warcraft, it's very much overgrown with, trees and plants and stuff. The Fracturing of Erethdor. As Tortheldrin and his followers retreated deeper into Eldra Thalas, the kingdom of Erethdor began to split apart. The once small trading outposts and cities that had been established after the Troll Wars had grown into mighty city-states of their own. Eventually, Strom saw its influence over these regions slip away. The island bastion of Kol Tiras continued its traditions of trading and shipping. The city-state boasted a massive navy, the greatest in all of Erethdor. Its most daring captains explored the coasts of the eastern kingdoms, returning with exotic goods and tales of strange lands in the remote corners of the continent. Kol Tiras's shipping and fishing economy eclipsed the maritime power of its northern neighbor, Gilneas. Unable to compete with Kol Tiras's burgeoning navy, Gilneas focused on bolstering its land-based armies and mercantile capabilities. The military of Gilneas became one of the most powerful in Erethdor, equaled only by the city-state of Alterac, which held dominion over much of the Northlands. Gilneas and Alterac often combined their forces and led grand expeditions to secure the borders of Erethdor. South of Strom, in Cosmodan, they discovered the dwarves and the gnomes. The expeditionary forces marveled at the wondrous feats of construction and engineering that were Ironforge and Gnomragon. The humans became quick friends with both races, especially the dwarves, who also shared their love of battle, storytelling, and strong ale. The three cultures engaged in rigorous trade, exchanging knowledge of smithing, mining, engineering, and even arcane magic. Over the years, Strom's power continued to wane. Bound by rocky, mountainous terrain and lacking natural resources, Strom could not compete with the economies of the other city-states. Eventually, many of Strom's noble families departed to the fertile valleys and pastures of the north. There they founded a city-state and named it after the surrounding region, Lordaeron. The nobles used their wealth to buy up large plots of land, some of which had been developed by earlier settlers. These areas included the Agamand Mills and the farmsteads owned by the Balnier and Soladin families. A lot of history going on here. Don't recognize a lot of these names. Okay, little aside. Lordaeron and the Holy Light. After the Troll Wars, a number of human priests began having faint visions and dreams of angelic beings, geometric forms that thrummed with living light. Although they did not know it, the priests had actually communed with the Naru in the great dark beyond. Through this connection, the Naru guided the hearts of some humans and introduced them to the holy light. From their tenuous encounters with the Naru, the priests learned to harness the extraordinary healing effects of the light. They also formed a religious movement founded on the tenets of justice, peace, and altruistic works. Popular among common folk, this movement flourished. Lordaeron was also home to deeply religious ascetics who believed in the light, a cosmic power they claimed infused every living thing in existence. Many sick and elderly people traveled to religious communes in Lordaeron, hoping to find a cure for their ailments. Others made pilgrimages to the city-state in search of wisdom and enlightenment. Lordaeron's borders quickly expanded, and it matured into a proper kingdom. The noble families eventually renamed the heart of their flourishing nation Capital City. Capital City, that's a boring name. Not long after the Lords of Strom went north, the last living descendants of King Thoradin also left Erethdor. Led by a member of Thoradin's line named Valdir, they set off by sea and ventured far to the south, enticed by rumors of a lush, unplumbed land where they could make a new beginning. The stories proved true. Thoradin's descendants settled the land and founded the kingdom of Stormwind. Nestled among cliffs and boasting a natural protected harbor, this city-state established itself as a major power in the region. Strom was left in the hands of a few ruling families too stubborn to abandon the old capital. Among them were the descendants of Igneous Trollbane, a general who had become a legend during the Troll Wars. Over the years, these families rebuilt Strom's crumbling infrastructure and renamed their capital Stromgard. The city, however, would never regain its former glory. Indeed, Thoradin's dream of unified people was dying. Over generations, the various city-states became increasingly distant and insular. Rivalries emerged as these nations turned inward, concerned with their own well-being and less inclined to offer aid to each other. Let's see if I can find this. No, that's not it. There we go. City-states of Erethdor: Lordaeron, Dalaran, Alterac, Gilneas, Strom, Kultaras, and Stormwind. Maraudon and the Rise of the Centaur, 1,100 years before the Dark Portal. For thousands of years, the nomadic Tauren wandered Kalimdor's lush forests, living in harmony with nature and the elements. Of the many lands the tribes roamed, one in particular became sacred ground for all Tauran shaman. It was called Mashanshi, or the Loom of the Earth Mother, named in honor of the mythical deity who they believed had created the world. This verdant grassland sat along Kalimdor's western coast, wedged between the jungles of Fereless and the Stone Talon Mountains. Drawn by faint elemental whisperings, the Tauran shaman grew convinced that the Earth Mother herself dwelled somewhere beneath the meadows. They spent decades attempting to wake her by communing with the region's elementals and conducting celebratory rituals. The shaman eventually succeeded, but they soon discovered that the whispers they had heard did not come from a benevolent Earth Mother. They were echoes of something far darker, something from Azeroth's violent elemental past. From the depths of a massive cavern below the grasslands emerged a colossal earth elemental, Princess Theradras, a descendant of the elemental ruler Therazane. In ages past, the Keepers had imprisoned most of the elementals in another plane of existence, yet some, like Theradras, had eluded this banishment. She had hidden beneath the earth, eventually falling into a deep slumber. The millennia of sleep had slowly weakened Theradras's mighty form. The newly awakened Theradras reached out to the verdant surroundings and consumed their energies. Invigorating power flooded through the elemental, regenerating her craggy form. Theradras's siphoning left enormous tracts of land desiccated. Plant life across Mashanshi withered and died. The horrified Tauran, now forced to scavenge for sustenance, would later rename the barren plains Desolus. So that's how that got that way. All right. All Prince Theradras's fault. The sudden and violent death of such vast intertwined ecosystems sent ripples throughout Azeroth and beyond. Many of the mortal druids and spirits in the Emerald Dream reeled from the staggering loss of life. One of Cenarius's woodland sons, Zeatar, emerged from the dream to investigate. Much like his father, Zeatar walked the physical world in the form of a majestic half-stag. Supple vines and verdant leaves circled his limbs and great antlers. Wherever his hooves touched the soil, dozens of saplings would sprout. In time, they would bloom into lush forest groves. Zeatar's investigation led him into the damp caverns beneath Desolus, where he discovered Theradras. Though he set his mind to imprisoning the strange creature, he soon grew enchanted with the princess. The stolen life energies that radiated from Theradras enticed Zeatar, and he became enthralled by her beauty. Theradras also found Zeatar beautiful, and she resolved to do whatever she could to win his undying love. The elemental princess was keenly aware of the influence she held over Zeatar, and she used this to her advantage. Theradras claimed that she had meant no harm to the land, and that she was seeking ways to restore the region to its former beauty. Together, she urged, perhaps they could succeed. Zeatar abandoned his earlier quest and became Theradras's mate. He knew it was against nature, but he could not deny the love that bloomed in his heart. From this forbidden union, an aberrant race was born. They were called the Centaur, and their barbarism would come to terrorize the lands of Kalimdor. Wow, okay, that's interesting. If you've ever seen Therazane, she looks like a big rock with legs and arms and a face. Like she's a rock monster. So, half stag, half man, centaur fell in love with a rock monster, and they had the centaur. Oh dear. What the centaur lacked in elegance and beauty, they made up for in strength. Their horse-like lower bodies afforded them great speed, while their burly humanoid torsos gave them incredible physical power. Yet the centaur's penchant for brutality overshadowed all of their other traits. Upon seeing the centaur, Zeatar immediately recognized the depths of his sin. Though he tried to connect with his offspring, he could not bear their presence. The centaur recognized the loathing in their father's eyes, and it drove them into a blind rage. The savage horsemen lashed out, striking Zeatar down. Zeatar's death shattered Theradress's heart. The elemental princess chastised the centaur for the senseless murder, and they grew forlorn at realizing they had hurt their beloved mother. They begged her forgiveness and promised that from that day forward they would honor and revere their late father. Theradress later entombed Zeatar's spirit in the great cavern where she had once slumbered. The centaur would name this site Maradon, and ever after they would treat it as holy ground. The centaur quickly proliferated, and they fanned out across Desolus. They unleashed their wrath on the hapless Tauren who inhabited the area, forcing them to abandon their homes. Yet Theradress's barbarous children did not stop in Desolus. In the centuries that followed, marauding bands of centaur would hunt down Kalimdor's Tauren, igniting a long and dark period of war between the two races. Well, we're going to stop there for a little bit and come back later. Thank you for listening.